This is a collection of censored videos about coronavirus. Esta es una colección de videos censurados acerca del coronavirus. The worldwide quarantine for the pandemic or is a and this has to end now.
YouTube CEO will delete anything that contradicts World Health Organization on COVID-19. In fact, this is her saying it herself.
Anything that would go against World Health Organization recommendations would be a violation of our policy.
All this is being censored, so please re-upload in part or in full, wherever you want, but please share it now. Todo esto está siendo censurado, así que por favor, resubilo en parte o completo a donde quieras. Pero por favor, compartilo ya.
Be clear in terms of the definition of people dying of COVID. So the case definition is very simplistic. It means at the time of death, it was a COVID positive diagnosis. So that means that if you were, technically, even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death. So everyone who's listed as a COVID death doesn't mean that that was the cause of the death, but they had COVID at the time of death. Everyone who's listed as a COVID death doesn't mean that that was the cause of the death, but they had COVID at the time of death.
And let's say the virus caused you to go to the ICU and then have a heart or kidney problem. Some countries are recording that as a heart issue or a kidney issue and not a COVID-19 death. Right now, we're still recording it. If someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death. Counting that as a COVID-19 death. If someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death. If someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death.
Now, I can't imagine if someone comes in with coronavirus, goes to an ICU, and they have an underlying heart condition and they die, they're going to say cause of death, heart attack. I cannot see that happening. Now, I can't imagine if someone comes in with coronavirus, goes to an ICU, and they have an underlying heart condition and they die, they're going to say cause of death, heart attack. I cannot see that happening.
¿Ya? ¿Sí? Buenos días.
What the CDC says in part about how to count COVID deaths. In cases where a definite diagnosis of COVID cannot be made, but is suspected or likely, it is acceptable to report COVID-19 on a death certificate as probable or presumed. It references the fact that basically this is a judgment call for doctors on how...
The idea that we're going to allow people to massage and sort of game the numbers is a real issue because, I mean, let's just take someone getting hit by a bus and they collapse a lung and they go into the emergency room and the COVID test comes back positive and they die 20 minutes later because of their collapsed lung. We're going to put that down as COVID-19? That doesn't make any sense. We're going to put that down as COVID-19? That doesn't make any sense. Right now, Medicare has determined that if you have a COVID-19 admission to the hospital, you'll get paid $13,000. If that COVID-19 patient goes on a ventilator, you get $39,000, 3 times as much. Right now, Medicare has determined that if you have a COVID-19 admission to the hospital, you'll get paid $13,000. That if you have a COVID-19 admission to the hospital, you'll get paid $13,000.
When it comes to COVID-19, there is the additional data skewer that is, get this, there is no universal definition of COVID-19 death. The Center for Disease Control updated from yesterday, April 4th, still states that mortality, quote-unquote, data includes both confirmed and presumptive positive cases of COVID-19. Translation, the CDC counts both true COVID-19 cases and speculative guesses of COVID-19 the same. They call it death by COVID-19. They automatically overestimate the real death numbers by their own admission.
Look, what I do know is this, that the WHO in conjunction with the CDC, is the one that decides what are called codes, diagnosis goo codes. One code was you explicitly, had a test and you had COVID-19. The other one was completely nebulous. Well, it sort of smells like that. Maybe he's got some chest pains, something so broad, but it was still under the COVID. The doctors in the United States received a letter from the CDC, as I have found out, that went to hospital administrators encouraging them to blur both of those codes. So if someone comes in, they have a pre-existing condition, someone with a chest pain, COVID-19, okay? And in fact, when someone dies, they do the test. Sometimes the test doesn't come back for 14 days. They're still putting COVID-19 on them. So they're increasing the numerator. And separate from that, we're telling people not to go out in the sun, which is vitamin D. Vitamin D is an antimicrobial. So this is essentially a recipe for actually hurting people, not really supporting them. How do you beef up the immune system? As I wrote to the president, vitamin D. Vitamin D is an antimicrobial.
Yes, he
This
is.
is about developing a police state. I hate to use these very harsh terms, but that is what we're talking about, control of the individual. This is big pharma, and these guys need to be fully exposed. And in my view, the real solution is for us to rethink how much governance and how much over-respect we give to MDs who unfortunately know nothing about the immune system. They don't study that in medical college.
It's been clear for quite a while that the coronavirus fiasco is either the biggest cock-up in history or the result of a conspiracy. Indeed, there's some evidence that people are being classified as coronavirus victims without ever having been tested. Some pathologists have decreed that dead patients who have the coronavirus must now be cremated without examination. I've seen a briefing which states, quote, if a death is believed to be due to confirmed COVID-19 infection, there is unlikely to be any need for a post-mortem examination to be conducted. The key word here is surely believed, if a death is believed to be due. But I suspect Britain's going one step further. If someone who dies is thought to have had the virus, or might have had the virus, then they're coronavirus victims and their death is added to the total. The lack of any testing or any real extensive testing makes this easy. Today, anyone who has the coronavirus or is thought to have it, even though they've not been tested, will be put down as having died of the coronavirus. Time and time again, the authorities report that someone died with the disease, not of the disease. And yet those patients are put down as having died as a result of the coronavirus. What this means is that if you fall downstairs and break your neck, but you had a cough before you died, then you're likely to be classified as a coronavirus death. If you had a heart attack, but were thought to have the coronavirus, then you officially died of the coronavirus rather than the heart attack. And postmortems have been abandoned for many patients. Fiddling the figures is the final cruel deceit to sustain the fear and to excuse the new totalitarian tactics which are being used to keep us all quiet. Meanwhile, it's now acknowledged that the number of people who've died as a direct result of the restrictions brought in by governments will far exceed the number of people who will die as a result of the coronavirus. And the United Nations estimates that worldwide 25 million jobs will be lost as a result of the coronavirus. And when unemployment rises, so does illness and death. The evidence that the coronavirus has been exaggerated is all around us. Whether you believe it's a cock-up or a conspiracy, we're heading for a manufactured coronavirus apocalypse. The lockdown and totalitarianism is troubling, but I fear that we're in the middle of a calm before a manufactured storm of unprecedented ferocity.
The new ICD-9 code, meaning it doesn't matter if you were guessing at it. Doesn't matter if you just thought maybe it was COVID-19. Put in the ICD-9 code. And in case you're worried about backlash, look at this sentence. It is not likely that NCHS will follow up on these cases. What? It's almost like they're saying, you know, go ahead and call it COVID-19. We're trying to bump these numbers up a little bit. And don't worry, it is coming from us. Obviously, even if you don't have a background, you don't have a test to prove it, and there's uncertainty, just put the code in there and don't worry about it, okay? Don't worry about it. We'll take it from there, and you will never get called out on this.
The government admits most deaths counts for are for other reasons. El gobierno admite que muchas muertes no son por sino por otras causas, aunque se registre diferente.
Now, this model informed government policy decisions in the U.S. and the U.K. Epidemiologist behind highly cited coronavirus model admits he was wrong, drastically revises model. Now the epidemiologist predicts hospitals will be just fine taking on COVID-19 patients. Ferguson also acknowledged that it was impractical to keep the UK in lockdown for so long because of the impact on the economy. Epidemiologist behind highly cited coronavirus model admits he was wrong. Epidemiologist behind highly cited coronavirus model admits he was wrong.
I'd like to start with the question of these models, which are now getting a lot of pushback in terms of their reliability. I think one of the problems is that those models were what were used to shut down the United States economy.
Yeah, well, first, I think it's important to point out that it isn't the model or the result of the model that really led to the decision to have such strong mitigation programs such as physical separation. You don't even have to look at any model. Just take a look at what happened in China. Take a look at what happened in northern Italy, how the hospitals were completely overrun and the draconian methods that had to be taken in China to turn down their outbreak. You just needed to look at China. That's all you needed to do and see what happened in China. And you don't need a model.
You know, number one, you don't know what the numbers are in China. China tells you numbers, and I'm speaking to President Xi tonight, I believe, and we'll have a good conversation, I'm sure. But you just don't know, what are the numbers? Number one, you don't know what the numbers are in China. Number one, you don't know what the numbers are in China.
China's testing kits claim to produce the results in just 10 to 15 minutes, but reports from many countries show that the results are far from accurate. China's testing kits results are far from accurate.
What did the epidemic really look like in China? I still can't tell you that. I can't tell you how many people were infected, how many people were asymptomatic, or was there a lack of transparency in reporting?
Yeah, so the data that are coming in from China, from Korea, are really interesting. There's been a lot of panic and a lot of focus on very, very high mortality numbers. But the thing to remember about those numbers is that they're measuring people that show up at the hospital or already have severe conditions. Just like almost any cold or flu, there's a range of reactions. Some people get very, very mild sickness, and some people have a much more severe illness. We're not measuring the people with a mild illness, and so the mortality numbers people suspect are likely to be lower than being reported. So for
the death rate outside Hubei at about 2.2% is sort of what people are getting from flu and other things. I don't think that is something that should lead to anything like this level of concern. You discover that even in cities very close to Wuhan, whereas other cities that are very, very close are basically just like cities elsewhere in China. So this is already very puzzling. It almost seems like in Hubei we have something more like poisoning than an infection. Right now, I think that outside of Hubei, the situation is nothing to be worried about. The death rate is basically about the same as good old influenza like this. So again, we're assuming that the numbers are accurate, and if the numbers aren't accurate...
Now, Italy, very interesting, has been grappling with the same debate for weeks. According to Professor Walter Ricciardi, is the scientific advisor to Italy's Minister of Health. This is what he said. He said, the way in which we code deaths in our country is very generous in the sense that all people who die in hospitals with the coronavirus are deemed to be dying of the coronavirus. On reevaluation by the National Institute of Health, only 12% of death certificates have shown a direct causality from coronavirus, while 88% of patients who have died have at least one pre-morbidity. Many had 2 or 3. It's that all people who die in hospitals with the coronavirus are deemed to be dying of the coronavirus. It's that all people who die in hospitals with the coronavirus are deemed to be dying of the coronavirus.
Dicono che il 96,3% sono morti per altre patologie. Non sono morte in Italia 25.000 persone di coronavirus. Non è vero, è un modo per terrorizzare gli italiani e imporre una dittatura del consenso. È ridicolo.
Deaths in New York City are more than double the usual total. What's going on in New York?
Well, New York knew for months that the virus was extra lethal in, of course, elderly and nursing home populations, as everyone's reporting. I mean, that's common knowledge. Governor sent out a directive to nursing homes, said that they can't deny patients to nursing homes that they suspect have COVID-19.
I mean, the one thing, if there was one thing, one data point we had in all of the confusion coming out of China, it appears to be affecting people 65 years and older. If there's one data point we had out of Italy as it moved to Italy, it's affecting people 65 and older. If there's one data point we had as it hit Washington the first time was a nursing home that got COVID inside of it was the first, a handful of deaths, right? Was it... We know that the nursing homes were the riskiest place, that people 65 and older. And to find out that Cuomo on May 25th says, I'm sorry, but you're not allowed to turn someone away in a nursing home that was just at the hospital and diagnosed with COVID-19. If there's one data point my 6-year-old daughter understands about COVID-19, it's that Grandma needs to be kept away from this thing. So what was Cuomo thinking? Was there a reason behind this?
None that I could see. And again, the New York Post has hammered him on this. He's been questioned about it too, and he really hasn't been forthright with any type of real explanation.
So now we know the nursing homes were not protected. In fact, they were forced to take on patients. But there's other issues. Nearly 9 in 10 COVID-19 patients who are put on a ventilator die, New York hospital data suggests. 2, New York not only did not heed the advice of the entire world and put their nursing homes at risk, they used as a treatment not oxygen, but ventilators, which killed 9 out of 10 patients that were put on it. But it doesn't stop there, right? One of the problems we've been hearing about is cash-starved hospitals and doctors groups cut staff amid pandemic. In cardiac calls in 9/11, this is what I want to get to, in New York City surge. And what are the outcomes if someone who has a heart issue is either afraid to come into the hospital, or number 2, their heart surgeon or who they would normally go to, their doctor, that doctor's been laid off. My doctor's not in there, and maybe I'm afraid of COVID-19. How has this affected this? It says emergency medical services, the part of the fire department that runs the city's paramedic response, is responding to 3 or 4 times its average daily number of cardiac calls, with each call almost twice as likely to involve a death. New York issues do not resuscitate guideline for cardiac patients amid coronavirus. So even for people not dying of coronavirus, now you have an issue where you're dying of a heart attack, and where we would normally save you under those circumstances, Governor Andrew Cuomo and the people, in New York have said, nah, do not resuscitate those people. Let, dead dogs die, or however the term goes. I mean, it's really quite shocking. I think that about sums it up. New York is a total fail when it comes to their actions and responses to COVID-19.
UK, China, and Italy original models are admitted wrong. Los modelos originales de Inglaterra, China e Italia acerca del son admitidos incorrectos. In New York, the measures from the government caused more deaths. En el epicentro de Estados Unidos, las medidas del gobierno causaron más muerte.
Okay, people, this is from the UK government's website, and just scroll down here to the status of COVID-19. As of the 19th of March 2020, COVID-19 is no longer considered to be a high-consequence infectious disease. No longer a high-consequence infectious.
Take a look at what the microphones captured in the White House press room this week.
Hey, all right, man. Where do you go, baby? You can take out the mask, Doug. The case fatality rate's like 0.1 to 0.3 according to
Is it really? Wow.
Which puts you right in line with the flu.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what it is. So it was a hoax.
I don't think it was a hoax.
So it was a hoax. So it was a hoax. So it was a hoax.
I don't think it was a hoax.
Taken out of context, Roberts told the Associated Press. The comments were made in jest. We were kidding. It was a big joke. It's not a big joke. The joke is on us. When you start catching people telling the truth and they try and say, oh no, we were joking, you really have got to wonder, why is that the headline? I think there's over 120 now world-renowned scientists all speaking out against the lockdown. It's over, folks. This thing is over. This was one of the videos that was censored from YouTube.
We've really wanted to come together today and kind of just really talk about, with our testing, you're isolating yourself, and we want to talk about if that still makes sense. The hospitals, their ICUs are empty, essentially, and they're shutting down floors. Is the flu less dangerous than COVID? Let's look at the death rates. No, it's not. They're similar in prevalence and in death rate, similar to the flu of 2017, 2018. We always have between 37 and 60,000 deaths in the United States every single year. No pandemic talk, no shelter in place, no shutting down of businesses. As I shelter in place, my immune system drops. You keep me there for months, it drops more. Sheltering in place decreases your immune system. And then as we all come out of shelter in place with a lower immune system and start trading viruses and bacteria, what do you think is going to happen? Disease is going to spike. And then you've got disease spike amongst a hospital system with furloughed doctors and nurses. This is not the combination we want to set up for a healthy society. It doesn't make any sense.
So quarantining and social distancing is worse for us, you're saying?
It decreases your immune system. Typically, you quarantine the sick. We've never seen where we quarantine the healthy, where you take those without disease and without symptoms and lock them in your home. I can go into Costco and I can shop with people, and there's probably a couple hundred people, but I can't go in Cafe Rio. So big businesses are open, little businesses are not. There's no science behind that. It's okay for us to go to Costco, but not to church. Do you see the lack of consistency here? From a microbiological, immunological standpoint, that doesn't make sense. When you wear gloves that transfer disease everywhere, those gloves have bacteria all over them. I'm wearing gloves, not helping you. As your mask that you're wearing for days, you touch the outside of it, COVID, and then touch your mouth. This doesn't make any sense. Do we need to still shelter in place? Our answer is emphatically no. And then eventually we treat this like we treat flu, which is if you have the flu and you're feeling fever and body aches, you just stay home. When you bring up a system of lockdown, you automatically have to compare it to a system of no lockdown, Sweden and Norway. Norway has lockdown, Sweden does not have lockdown. What happened in those two countries? About 2 million cases of COVID in Sweden. They did a little bit of social distancing. They would wear masks and separate. They went to schools, stores were open. They were almost about their normal daily life with a little bit of social distancing. They had how many deaths? 1,765. Norway, they have about 1.3 million cases. Now, their deaths as a total number were 182, fairly small, but statistically insignificant from 1,700, you realize. It is not statistically significant whether you lock down or not. So why are we doing it?
You know, each year, I've been following flu seasons for 15 years. Every year we have a season that ramps up in December, January, February. It starts tapering off in March. And we have a vaccine for flu. Well, how well is that working? We have in 2017, 2018, we had 60,000 deaths from flu, and we have a vaccine. So the conversation really needs to be about herd immunity and letting that run. The Swedish did not lock down. People are not locked in their homes. Businesses are open and their results are good. And Dr. Anders Tegnell, their chief epidemiologist, when asked, how's your approach working? He said, we're very happy. He said, you guys are the experimental lab rats. You're doing something never done. We're doing a rational, stepwise approach. We're allowing people to make their own decisions, and we trust that the Swedish citizens are smart. And now they're saying, who has the freedom now? So this is an experiment we're trying. And my thought is, if you're going to do an experiment, you better have some good scientific data before you lock people in their homes, tell them they can't come out, cause depression, anxiety, alcoholism. This is stuff that's coming into my offices. This is not fabricated. And they let criminals out, and they tell us we can't go to the beach or parks and get arrested. You can see this is not rational. Fear has taken over, and people have given up their freedoms for fear, in my opinion. Most people that have had it have little to no symptoms. They call them, you know what an asymptomatic carrier is? A healthy person. They have this magic name. Are you an asymptomatic carrier? That's called a healthy person with no disease.
Are we going to see an outbreak when we open up, and are we going to see a second wave in the fall, in your mind?
Do you know why we would have a second wave? Why? Because we sheltered in place.
Well, meanwhile, over in Sweden, it's an entirely different story because they are the one country that refused to apply these incredibly wrong models, refusing to have mandatory lockdowns, refusing to shut down the economy and destroy the economy, and applying only voluntary social distancing.
We are not telling people to stay indoors.
The chief health minister for Sweden has announced that the country is only weeks away from herd immunity in the capital city of Stockholm. What Sweden decided to do, and was criticized by the rest of the world, is working.
Sí contrastan visiblemente los suecos es con países como España, Francia, Italia y el Reino Unido, donde se tomaron estrictas medidas de confinamiento. Si nos dejamos llevar por estos números, la estrategia parece haber sido exitosa para Suecia y sin provocar un descalabro.
Many doctors says
they're putting the cause of death as COVID-19 for almost everything right now. And because they can't justify the numbers, they're now manipulating the numbers. We know that stress increases the cortisol, which is the stress hormone, which decreases the immune system. So when you scare people, tell them to stay home, you suppress their immune system because you're scaring them, you further suppress them because economic issues, they're stressed out. Now you tell them wear a face mask. What are you doing when you're wearing a face mask? A face mask reduces the amount of oxygen coming in. So now your body's in a chronic state of stress. And that face mask is obstructing air. So tell me, if they really want to help people, why are they telling people that they should be wearing masks?
Our data suggests that COVID-19 has an infection fatality rate that is in the same ballpark as seasonal influenza. It suggests that we have solid ground to have optimism about the possibility of eventually reopening our society and gaining back our lives. COVID-19 is in the same ballpark as seasonal influenza. COVID-19 in the same ballpark as seasonal influenza.
Now what we're looking at right here is a so-called American Medical Association Encyclopedia of Medicine. There it is right. Now, as you can see right here, take a look. What it say right there. You see it? It's 1989. This encyclopedia was published. There you go. It's the same thing. There you go. It's no trick here. Now let's find the corona disease. As you can see, the coronavirus. Let's find it as on this chart right here, because you know already, I told you already, they changed shit for the next generation. You see it? Take a look. This is the coronavirus right here. You see it? You see it? What it say across from it? It says the common cold. Can you see it? They tell you it's the common cold.
First, I want to say that in 30 years of public health medicine, I have never seen anything like this. And I'm not talking about the pandemic, because I've seen 30 of them, one every year. It's called influenza. But I've never seen this reaction. And I'm trying to understand why. One is that the data they're getting is incomplete to really make sense of the size of the threat. Third problem is the pressure that is being put on our public health doctors and our public health leaders. And that pressure is coming from various places. The first place it came from was the Director General of the World Health Organization.
Or so-called pandemic vaccines, well, we never know whether they'll work because, of course, there is no target virus to test the vaccine against. What the evidence shows is that these vaccines have got a performance which is not very good, and they work best in healthy adults, i.e. those who've got good immune systems in the first place. and for which they usually are not recommended.
What do you say about calling this flu a pandemic?
I don't understand what a pandemic is anymore. And the reason for that is as follows. In 2003, WHO described an influenza pandemic as follows. An influenza pandemic occurs when a new influenza virus appears against which the human population has no immunity, resulting in several simultaneous epidemics worldwide with enormous numbers of deaths and illness. Sometime in May 2009, this definition changed as follows. An influenza pandemic may occur when a new influenza virus appears against which the human population has no immunity. In other words, what they've done is they've taken out the part that referred to simultaneous outbreaks, high morbidity, that's a very high number of severe cases, and mortality. So now this definition, this 2009 definition, could very well fit seasonal influenza. So I don't understand what the difference is anymore. And it obviously favors those who have to sell products.
Is not worse than the flu, and the general quarantine, mask or gloves are bad for your health. Countries without quarantine are better than those with lockdown. Doctores dicen que el no es peor que la gripe y que la cuarentena general, la máscara y los guantes son malos para la salud. Países sin cuarentena están mejor que los que cerraron.
No, I hope we're going to have a vaccine, and we're going to fast track it like you've never seen before. If we come up with a vaccine, I think they probably will.
I'm today making available £20 million to the Oxford team that the vaccine from the Oxford project will be trialled in people from this Thursday. In normal times, reaching this stage would take years, and I'm very proud of the work taken so far.
Zentral, und wir wissen alle, dass wir mit der Pandemie leben müssen, bis wir einen Impfstoff gefunden haben.
Pero la victoria será total cuando, además de eliminarlo, contemos con una vacuna que evite futuras pandemias. Contemos con una vacuna que evite futuras pandemias.
Si podemos conseguir el medicamento, la vacuna que termine y nos ayude a resolver la pelea contra el coronavirus.
The flu season is upon us. Which type will we worry about this year? And what kind of shots will we be told to take? Remember the swine flu scare of 1976? That was the year the U.S. government told us all that swine flu could turn out to be a killer that could spread across the nation. And Washington decided that every man, woman, and child in the nation should get a shot to prevent a nationwide outbreak, a pandemic. Well, 46 million of us obediently took the shot. And now 4,000 Americans are claiming damages from Uncle Sam amounting to $3.5 billion because of what happened when they took that shot. By far the greatest number of the claims, 2/3 of them, are for neurological damage or even death, allegedly triggered by the flu shot.
Who's funding this? Where's the money coming from? Who's on your television channel? I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. Pharma is going to try to take over the world. It's paying 50 to 70% of all advertising on your television. All of your news anchors work for pharma. We are seeing our world change before us. You have to understand there's a massive bias going on. You see, you would have said it's a conspiracy theory to say that pharma is guiding television and those things that are being said on television. It's about vaccinating every adult. The money is in all the adults, 330 million Americans, or 7.5 billion people around the world. That is a payout. That the real ID is coming, ID 2020, that they were going to track your ID, and that ID would be attached to your vaccine records. Oh, except now Bill Gates is saying, no, that's exactly what it does.
And who is funding the Imperial College of London? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Hello, I'm Bill Gates, chairman of Microsoft. In this video, you're going to see the future.
Until we get almost everybody vaccinated globally, we still won't be fully back to normal.
Bill Gates is no public health expert. He is not a doctor, an epidemiologist, or an infectious disease researcher. Bill Gates has spent much of the past 2 decades transforming himself from software magnate into a benefactor of humanity through his own Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It was Gates who sponsored the meeting that led to the creation of Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. Founding partner of the alliance, the Gates Foundation provided $750 million in seed funding and has gone on to make over $4.1 billion in commitments to the group. It comes as no surprise, then, that far beyond the $250 million that the Gates Foundation has pledged to the fight against coronavirus, every aspect of the current coronavirus pandemic involves organizations, groups, and individuals with direct ties to Gates funding. From the start, the World Health Organization has directed the global response to the current pandemic. The WHO's most recent donor report shows that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the organization's second largest donor behind the United States government. The Gates Foundation single-handedly contributes more to the World Health Body than Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Russia, and the UK combined. What's more, current World Health Organization Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus is in fact, like Bill Gates himself, not a medical doctor at all. Anthony Fauci, meanwhile, has become the face of the US government's coronavirus response.
If you want to get to pre-coronavirus, that might not ever happen in the sense of the fact that the threat is there. But I believe with the therapies that will be coming online and with the fact that I feel confident that over a period of time we will get a good vaccine, that we will never have to get back to where we are right back now.
Fauci has direct ties to Gates projects and funding. In 2010, he was appointed to the Leadership Council of the Gates-founded Decade of Vaccines project to implement a global vaccine action plan, a project to which Gates committed $10 billion of funding. Also in October of last year, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation partnered with the World Economic Forum and the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security to stage Event 201, a tabletop exercise gauging the economic and societal impact of a globally spreading coronavirus pandemic. In effect, Gates has merely used the wealth from his domination of the software market to leverage himself into a similar position in the world of global health. Gates is held up as a hero for donating $35.8 billion worth of his Microsoft stock to the foundation. But during the course of his decade of vaccines, Gates' net worth has actually doubled, from $54 billion to $103.1 billion. Even The Lancet observed this worrying transformation from software monopolist to health monopolist back in 2009, when the extent of this Gates-led monopoly was becoming apparent to all.
It is fair to say things won't go back to truly normal until we have a vaccine that we've gotten out to basically the entire world. Most of the work we're going to do to be ready for pandemic 2, I call this pandemic 1, most of the work we'll do to be ready for that are also the things we need to do to minimize the threat of bioterrorism.
Most of the work we're going to do to be ready for pandemic 2, to be ready for pandemic 2.
To head off the conspiracy theorists, maybe we shouldn't call the vaccine the final solution. Maybe just the best solution. Okay.
And the thing that'll get us back to the world that we had before coronavirus is the vaccine and getting that out to all 7 billion people. And which activities like mass gatherings may be, in a certain sense, more optional. And so until you're widely vaccinated, those may not come back at all. Eventually, what we'll have to have is certificates of who's a recovered person, who's a vaccinated person, because around. So eventually there will be sort of this digital immunity proof that will help facilitate the global reopening
up. Let's plug it in. It's going to say, hey, I see you plugged in a new device. And it's going to load in the appropriate drivers. You'll notice that this scanner build, whoa. Moving right along.
That must be why we're not shipping Windows 98 yet.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
UN is paid by USA and Bill Gates, who wants to sell vaccines that could be dangerous. La ONU está financiada por Estados Unidos y Bill Gates, que quieren vender vacunas con posible peligro.
COVID-19 test. The situation itself, is it as bad as ever the media is saying, the whole pandemic?
Oh, no, it's the flu.
It's just the flu.
It's the flu.
That's all it is.
It's the flu.
Wow. Is the media accurately reporting, or is it as bad as people are saying?
No.
It's not as bad as the media is making it out bigger. Wow.
Oh, no, it's the flu.
It's just the flu.
It's the flu.
That's all it is.
It's the flu.
Wow.
It's the flu. It's the flu. It's the flu.
Health and Hospital Metropolitan ER.
Opinion, right? I'm really curious. What is your actual opinion of the whole thing? Do you think it's overblown? Do you think it's... I mean, what's the real story?
Definitely taking it out. Honestly,
a lot of people come to the hospitals over-exaggerating and be sent home because don't have it. So unfortunately, when you walk in, you say, I think I have, it goes down considered a case. It gets reported to the CDC. So it adds to the numbers.
So the CDC is just telling us everybody who...
Yeah, everybody who walks in the doors complaining of it gets put in as a case until proven otherwise. Yeah, everybody who walks in the doors complaining of it gets put in as a case until proven otherwise.
Inside Marmo's funeral home in Brooklyn, the shocking reality. Bodies are piling up so fast, he's running out of space.
We've been out in the street talking to some folks who are on the front lines. People, for example, in funeral homes, discovered some troubling things.
To be honest with you, all of the death certificates, they're writing COVID on all of the death certificates. Whether they had a positive test, whether they didn't, the more they put COVID on the death certificate, the more they can ask for federal funds. So I think it's political. Can I prove that? No, but that is my suspicion. I've seen people, say COVID in the family of somebody never tested, we don't know, and they're writing it anyway. Because if, the law allows them, like, if it's in their medical opinion, it allows them to write it. So they don't even have to prove it.
And they're not even testing these people for COVID.
They're not even testing these people. If the doctor thinks you had COVID, he's allowed to write it down.
To me, all you're doing is you're padding statistics. You're putting people on that have COVID-19. If they didn't have it, you're making the death rate for New York City a lot higher than it should be. A lot of people have been dying at home. They're automatically putting down on the death certificate COVID-19 because they don't want to go. But now they're putting everything as COVID-19, so they're padding the numbers that are making it look like, I had a 40-year-old man that died in his house, okay? They didn't even go to the house. They're saying he had COVID-19 because he had a fever. But now, how do you know that's what he had? You don't. But now your death certificate shows he had COVID-19.
I had one that was autopsy because right away they put down COVID-19 on it. Death certificate and did an independent autopsy, bingo, no COVID-19.
Okay, so this is a case where someone was said to have had it, and then afterwards they checked, no COVID-19.
Basically, every certificate that comes across our desk now has COVID on it. Even if people aren't tested, if they have a cough, if they have a flu symptom, it's basically considered covert.
So I'm here at the Tallahassee Center for corona testing. But when you go to the testing center, they say there's no order, no need to test. This whole thing is a farce.
And officials say this, unfortunately, is just the beginning, with the crisis expected to last for months and the peak of it all still on the horizon.
Elmhurst Hospital, lines of people outside wait to get tested.
Long lines of people trying to get tested. I don't see that.
A refrigerated truck has now been brought in here, a makeshift morgue.
Here's the refrigerated truck for the dead people, but no action.
Ambulances have seen a surge in calls, responding to nearly 5,800 Thursday.
All parked ambulances, no patients, nobody's rushing anywhere.
Supposed to be getting tested on a big mad show. People look at the testing centres. There is no testing going on. Wake up, people. Right down to the end, look. There is no testing. There is no testing going on.
They are overrun in this hospital, so stretched that an area of the waiting room has been screened off to make a temporary ward.
Elmhurst Hospital is the epicenter of the COVID crisis that we're going through.
Yeah, the system's overwhelmed all over the place.
Oh, check this out. I'm inside right now. You're all looking at this right now?
Mire, cheque, mire, yo estoy aquí adentro.
Everything is here right now.
Oh, no,
oh my God, this was really full. Wow, it's so full right now. Wow.
Have you been overrun with coronavirus patients?
Not as of yet.
Are you surprised by that?
No, we're doing well.
I don't know. That's a lot of ambulances parked here, thrown out of the hospital because they don't want people to have clear information about them.
So many more places all over the city that will be turned into hospitals in this crisis to protect you and your family and your fellow New Yorkers.
Jeez.
So many people are dying in New York City due to coronavirus complications that the morgues are crowded, to the point where new graves are being dug off Hart Island near the Bronx.
Aerial drone footage of what is being passed off as a trench mass grave somewhere in New York. This is, in fact, Hart Island, sometimes referred to as Hart's Island. The remains of more than 1 million people are buried on Hart Island, though since the first decade of the 21st century, there are fewer than 1,500 burials a year. Burials on Hart Island include individuals who were not claimed by their families or did not have private funerals, the homeless and the indigent, and mass burials of disease victims, including those who died from AIDS and COVID-19. So the rather shocking video footage that has now been circulating the internet that some reporters are actually calling mass graves that are being dug specifically for COVID-19 has in fact been the situation for quite some time. I went to YouTube just to search around, and within 5 minutes I was able to find footage from the 1990s of Hart Island being used for this exact type of mass burial. Footage that was uploaded to YouTube almost 10 years ago and which is itself from the 1990s shows inmates digging mass graves for mass burials on Hart Island. And how easily so many people can be misled with information that they find in the news.
Full, so outside the now familiar sight of white refrigerated trucks to shoulder the overflow.
Y'all, this shit is for real, y'all. This is for real. This is for real. This is Brooklyn, y'all. Don't have room inside the hospital for bodies. They put them in the back of a freezer truck. This is for real. This is for real. This is for real. This is real. This is real. This is real.
Forced to buy ventilators from China because it was like bidding on eBay to secure enough in his own country.
As you see, the title here, New York coronavirus cases surge, hospitals struggle to cope. Or why would the media resort to using a doll?
Okay, look at the hole in the arm. Look at the hole here. Look at this bulge in the neck. And look at that hairline, man. Closer in again. Look at that hairline. I mean, does anybody actually think that that's real?
It says, no food and or drinks allowed near mannequins and or task trainers.
But people need to know the truth about what's going on. And if they're telling you that all these people are dying and the nurses and doctors are dying and they're sacrificing their lives, then why are they using dolls in their videos? Why?
Look at this. You have all these passed out doctors and all this stuff, right? Come on. But dude, this is...
The ICU is already overwhelmed.
So we go back to that. Here's, according to ABC on March 20th, this is Italy. And according to CBS on March 24th, this is New York. the same footage from the same hospitals. You got the two doctors, one in green scrubs, one in blue scrubs. And if you pause it right here, you see you got the same computer, same wastebasket, same green thing here on the bed. The back's exactly the same. It's the same exact footage, one being used for Italy and one being used for New York.
They actually played the footage side by side, one being captioned Italy and one being captioned New York. And of course, the viewers at home caught this mistake.
Published by the New York Times and created essentially by this one doctor. Let's have a look at some of the video footage.
We are right now scrambling to try to get a few additional ventilators.
Now we're seeing 400 or more people a day. It's a little bit scary now as the patients that we're getting are much sicker. Many of the young people who are getting sick don't smoke. They're healthy. They have no comorbidities. They're just young, regular people between the ages of 30 and 50 who you would not expect.
So let's investigate. Here's her LinkedIn page, Colleen Smith, and oddly, it doesn't say doctor. Emergency medicine physician and resuscitationista with interests in simulation. Here we notice that she went to the New York University School of Medicine. She was a simulation fellow. A simulation fellow. A simulation fellow. Her skills and endorsements: medical simulation. It's medical simulation. It's medical simulation. This is a presentation she made that is uploaded onto this site. Here it says simulation. Here it says simulation. Here it says simulation. This P.J. Moore, 1958. That the Twitter bio of Colleen Smith also doesn't say doctor, but it does say simulationista. 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 So she's the one behind this. And all major television and media, print media, spread this story around uncritically. Simulationista. Simulationista. Simulationista.
This is the most scared I've ever been being an ER doctor.
You walk in and it's hard for me to say, but you can actually smell fear. You smell death.
Now left foot, right foot, now left foot, right foot, now left foot, right foot, now left.
We had a few patients die in the emergency room because the hospital's full.
People who are weak, people who are scared. And I'm not gonna lie, it's making me scared.
Man, this be got me feeling like the franchise boy in this bitch. Lean with it, rock with it.
I seriously starting to think that this is really starting to take a toll on me. Between seeing people die and like having to work 12, 13, 14-hour shifts, it's like really taking a toll on me now. Yeah.
Right now, Medicare has determined that if you have a COVID-19 admission to the hospital, you'll get paid $13,000. If that COVID-19 patient goes on a ventilator, you get $39,000, 3 times as much.
It hurts. Why does it hurt so much? Claire? Claire?
TV 6 hospitals and funerals are full, but people show they are empty. Los noticieros dicen que los hospitales y funerarias están llenos, pero la gente muestra que están vacíos.
El fenómeno del coronavirus, que se ha calificado falsamente como pandemia, necesita ser examinado desde la perspectiva de los poderes globales, religiosos, políticos, financieros, económicos y nacionales. El fenómeno coronavirus, la llamada pandemia, y déjeme decirle que no es una pandemia, es una completa mentira. Ha de ser considerado como una operación estratégica global. Son ejercicios militares de comando sobre las personas por parte de los poderes ocultos que controlan a la humanidad. Ese es el objetivo real del coronavirus.
Northwards was a series of proposals to commit acts of terrorism in US cities and elsewhere. The operation proposed creating public support for a war against Cuba by blaming it for terrorist acts. To this end, Operation Northward's proposals recommended hijackings and bombings followed by the introduction of phony evidence that would implicate the Cuban government.
Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. I have directed that the following initial steps be taken immediately. First, to halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. A strict quarantine. Quarantine is now in effect. Quarantine is now in effect. Quarantine is now in effect.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
Enough is enough. Go home and stay home.
A statewide order for people to stay at home.
And this is how it's going to be. We will shut you down, we will cite you, and if we need to, we will arrest you and we will take you to jail. Period. You violate the law and you refuse to do what is necessary to save lives in the city in the middle of a pandemic, we will take you to jail. Period. So, that means if you host a party, if you promote a party, if you go to a party, we're not playing games, we mean business, and we are going to shut this down one way or the other.
The majority of the public here in Northamptonshire are complying. Sadly though, we have a small number of people who are persistently and consistently disobeying the law, and so that period of grace is over. This means for some people fixed penalty notices. It means for some people going to court. And it also means for some people getting a criminal record. So we will not at this stage be setting up roadblocks. We will not at this stage be starting to marshal supermarkets and checking the items in baskets and trolleys to see whether it's a legitimate, necessary item. But again, be under no illusion, if people do not heed the warnings and the pleas that I'm making today, we will start to do that.
What's new and what's really critical is this constant sentinel surveillance for asymptomatic individuals in communities that we know are particularly.
Last week, Dr. Michael Ryan, he's a leader at the World Health Organization, announced that in response to the spread of this virus, authorities may have to enter people's homes and remove family members, presumably by force.
In most parts of the world, due to lockdown, most of the transmission that's actually happening in many countries now is happening in the household, at family level. In some senses, transmission has been taken off the streets and pushed back into family units. Now we need to go and look in families to find those people who may be sick and remove them and isolate them in a safe and dignified manner.
Just so you know, we're coming to your house, seizing your children and, quote, isolating them in a safe and dignified manner.
In 1940, we as children spoke from here at Windsor to children who had been evacuated from their homes and sent away for their own safety. Today, once again, many will feel a painful sense of separation from their loved ones. But now as then, we know deep down that it is the right thing to do.
Piurana, al norte del país, miren ustedes lo ordenados que son los chulucanos.
Miren, cuando nos enviaron estas imágenes pensamos que estábamos en otro país, en la China,
o en otro país de Europa donde se están tomando pues medidas.
Mira, hasta para girar.
Pero mira la cantidad.
In the small town of Westport, Connecticut, a drone is scanning for COVID-19 symptoms. The drone claims they can also detect whether you're running a fever, sneezing, or coughing heavily, all through a single camera flying 40 feet overhead.
Involve thermal screening as a frontline tool.
Since the outbreak, dozens of companies have started manufacturing these cameras for use across industries in airports, healthcare centers, and even apartment buildings.
Seguramente comprobaremos que esta emergencia mundial tiene como efecto acelerar cambios que ya se estaban poniendo en marcha desde hace ya años. El cambio acelerado hacia la digitalización y la automatización, el cambio hacia formas de gobernanza mundial para hacer frente a amenazas que son también globales, como hemos visto es, por ejemplo, esta pandemia.
Y avanzar en un cambio del modelo productivo que permita que España se posicione como una economía dinámica, fuerte, en este nuevo orden mundial.
Este despertar debería ser la base para repensar un nuevo mundo, un nuevo orden mundial.
No one else measured it, but we have measured it. And that's what the new world order is. So we're leading by example on social distancing with this.
More than 1 in 5 Americans is about to be living under a new world order as New York joins California and a growing list of US states preparing to effectively shut down.
And those people who have been yelling, oh, the UN's going to take over global
Conspiracy theorists.
They've been crazy, but now they're right.
It's no longer a conspiracy theory anymore. It's a reality.
They will stop at nothing to complete their toolkit of control. Right? So one of the things that has been missing from the toolkit of total control has been quarantines and curfews. Right? Scenarios for the future international development, the Rockefeller Foundation. Look at this up on the internet. It's called Lockstep, a world of tighter top-down government control and more authoritarian leadership. The pandemic that the world had been anticipating for years finally hit. Even the most pandemic-prepared nations were quickly overwhelmed when the virus streaked around the world and killing 8 million in just 7 months. International mobility of both people and goods screeched to a halt. Even locally, normally bustling shops and offices sat empty for months. However, a few countries did fare better. China in particular. The Chinese government's quick imposition and enforcement of mandatory quarantine for all citizens saved millions of lives, stopping the spread of virus far earlier than in other countries. During the pandemic, national leaders around the world flexed their muscles and imposed airtight rules and restrictions. And even supermarkets, they want body checks at supermarkets. Okay, so basically what they're saying is they're building a system where every move you make, you gotta go through them. Even after the pandemic faded, this more authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and even intensified. Raw, naked control agenda written down, and it's how this becomes effectuated in real life. So the message is here is we have to look towards the Chinese, the oppressive totalitarian Chinese regime as an example of what we need to be doing here. And if you want to live in a world where you're tricked into all this stuff because it's for your safety, right? And make sure you gotta check your pockets, make sure you don't have anything incriminating on you before you go out, and when you step out of your house, you want some police there to monitor and see what you're doing. If that's the world you want to live in, be apathetic, don't do anything. You're gonna get that world very soon. It's coming your way.
The world quarantine is part of all plans to enforce global social control. La cuarentena mundial es parte de viejos planes para control social global.
Everything we're doing is basically voluntary on behalf of people, right? State government, local government, federal government doesn't have the power to enforce stay-at-home orders. If 19 million people said, I'm going out today, they would go out.
Well, this is picking up steam as the day grows on. Protests underway in several cities as more states push to reopen.
Texas is open.
The CDC has told hospitals and doctors to label all deaths, no matter whether they're a heart attack, a stroke. They did not do any testing. They are told to count that as a coronavirus death.
Years, almost the whole time here in Raleigh. I'm not an actor, just in case you know. Because you know I'm here to tell you the media is lying to you. I'm here to tell you that nursing is hard, just generally, it's just hard. It's hard when you've got a sick patient. It's mentally, physically draining, emotionally draining, but we're not seeing them. Yeah. I worked yesterday and my ICU that is designated for this virus was empty. The medical floor that's designated for this has never been full. And I look every day. But please don't let this skew your idea that we can't go out, we can't go out. You've got to go out. You've got to get exposed. You've got to build your immunity if that's what it takes.
You know, guys, it's simple, like a lot of them have said. The Constitution needs no explanation. It's been in force for several hundred years now. It's easy to understand. It says what it means and means what it says. And the last time I read the Declaration of Independence, it specifically reminds all of us that we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, which means God given, and that governments were instituted among men specifically to secure our God-given rights. And it says when government becomes destructive to these ends, meaning when they go, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish that government, either by voting or ultimately, God forbid, to use our Second Amendment rights to protect ourselves from tyranny. I'm not going to enforce an unconstitutional law. I'm going to
You know, we always have in the military, we have what's a lawful order? Is this a lawful order or is this a bullshit order? And when something's a bullshit order and it doesn't pass the sniff test, that's when you say sergeant, that's when you say colonel, that's when you say general, that's when you say governor. I'm not doing that. I didn't sign up for that. So the question, I want each and every one of you to do a gut check right now. He's looking at me with binoculars right now, right? God bless them, right?
Shit, there's a sniper
Well, what I want you to get is now is the time for you to decide. And so the question is, you got a steady paycheck coming in, but how many people right here, pardon my language, are getting fucked right now? How many people are getting fucked right now? And you guys are supporting that. You're endorsing that. People are talking in the background with their masks on, but there's no social distancing going on. It's hilarious. I want to work for somebody ethical. I think Sacramento PD is really hiring. I do. And their leadership doesn't want to beat up on women and children. I heard that when there's an unlawful or immoral order, you have to stand up. And when you stand up and you get that feeling of anxiety in your stomach, and it's hard, that's because God's stretching you. God's got something on the other side of that, and that's called a transformation. Because right now, if you're getting that feeling like this is wrong, and I shouldn't be doing this, and I'm on the wrong side of history right now, we don't beg government for permission. Do not beg. That's what slaves do. We tell the government, Texas is open. We do not beg. We tell them, Texas is open.